Welcome back. I'm Skyler Pilgram. I'm a member of Emmanuel Christian Church, and today I'm going to have a conversation with David Pears, an elder of Emmanuel Christian, and we're going to look at some elements about being involved in the community and his journey with being a member of the school board. And so, David, it's glad to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. So a lot of people right now aren't very happy with our elected officials. And so what are some proactive things that we can do as Christians to kind of get involved with like what our local government or even our federal government is doing as far as making our voice heard?
Yeah, well, we're actually coming up on a very important thing, and that's the primaries. I think most people know the primaries were moved to June 2nd. They originally were to be, I believe, this past Tuesday, but because of the virus and the government not wanting the election polls to be, have a lot of people at them, so they moved them out to June 2nd, which is the last date that we can do them and still have primaries in our state. And so, and in this particular year, it's not only, some local kinds of offices, state as well as it's federal. So this is a presidential election year, so we get to vote on which president we want to, or which person we want to have run for president, as well as all the other offices. There are state representatives up for re-election. There are federal congressmen up for re-election, and judges and just a whole slate of people. So really, the important thing as Christians living in our society, where we get freedom of choice in our elections, we don't have kings, and so we get to go, it's a representative form of government, so we get to go and select which people we want to represent us. So, investigating the people that are running, and primaries, the whole point of a primary is the two parties, Republicans and Democrats, whoever wants to run for office, if they follow the procedures and get on the ballot, then there'll be multiple people on the ballot for a particular office, and then we get to go select which one we prefer. So if you're a Republican, you get to select the Republican candidate. If you're a Democrat, you get to select the Democratic candidate. And then in the fall, in November, we will vote on between the Republican and the Democrat and all the other independents as well. And the primaries, independents don't get to be on the ballot. It's only Republicans and Democrats. And so it's only people who are registered. You have now until May 18th to register if you're not registered to vote. So it's important to get out there and register so you can vote. Mm-hmm. And if you're afraid to go to the polls because of the virus or whatever, there's still time to get an absentee ballot. You have until the end of May to get an absentee ballot and fill that out and post that as well.
So what's the difference between like the absentee and the mail-in that everyone's been like pushing lately?
Okay, so some states we don't actually have a mail-in. We only have absentee ballots. There are some states where you can either vote early. We just have one single day. Like Ohio, you can go vote up. I think it's 2 weeks prior to the official date. You can go anytime during those 2 weeks and vote. And some states have mail-in ballots. So it's kind of like an absentee ballot, but unlike our absentee ballots, they're not counted until after the actual primary. And so say there's somebody running and it comes down, and say somebody handily wins the majority, and say they win by more than 100 votes, and there's only 50 absentee ballots. They don't have to count them at that point because there's not enough absentee ballots to offset. So they may or may not count that ballot then. So, but with a mail-in ballot, every vote is counted. Yeah, and you can mail them in any time. And so, with absentee ballots, they have to be to the courthouse. I believe it's a week. There's a cutoff time, and so you have to get them in. You have to fill them out appropriately and get them in on time, and and you have to request it. You have to officially request it versus mail-in ballots. I think anybody can go grab a ballot. And so it's a little more. Some people claim it's a little more easy to have fraud with mail-in ballots than an absentee ballot. Absentee ballots, you have to request it, and then they So they know exactly how many absentee
Okay.
ballots they send out and who they send it to, et cetera.
So that's like the main concern, because like whenever you go to your local township building, you walk through the line, and then they ask you for your name, and then
Exactly.
make sure that you're on that list and stuff.
Right,
But it
but
sounds like the mail-in ballot doesn't have.
Right, so the
system
mail-in
like
ballot,
that.
they don't necessarily check to see whether you were registered or not. So, and that you're actually voting for that correct party, right? So it gets a lot more complicated. With our system, if you request an absentee, they only send you the Republican if you're registered Republican, et cetera. And they verify that you're actually registered, et cetera. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot more controls in place.
Yeah. It seems a little clumsy, I think.
Yeah.
You'd think in something that important they would.
Well, yeah, you would hope so anyway. I mean, the criticism is that we make it so complicated. Then it discourages people from voting or whatever. But I think at least in Pennsylvania anyway, and this will all be decided state by state.
Yeah.
I believe so. But in Pennsylvania anyway, we still value. We only have one day. There's no early voting. You have to register. They still check your name, and they don't necessarily check your license per se, but they verify who you say you claim to be. Especially in our community, everybody knows everybody anyway.
Yeah, everybody knows everybody. Yep.
Yeah.
So, getting to the everybody knows everybody thing, you're a member of the local school board.
I am.
So, was there any campaigning you had to do to kind of get the community familiar with who you are and what background or what ethics you follow and stuff?
Okay. School board elections and county commissioner, those kind of local offices, they're on the off year, so they won't be on the ballot this year.
They're every 2 years?
They're every 4 years. That's a 4-year
okay.
That's a 4-year office, but they're always like 2019, 2023. So there's always 1 year off of
it's 1 year off. Okay.
of the presidential elections, and so. But they're still obviously very important things. That's why every year it's important to get out there and vote. But and with a school board, there's 9 directors on every school board in every school district in Pennsylvania. And every 4 years, either 4 or 5 people are up for election posts. There's positions.
Okay.
And so this past election that I ran for, there were 5 positions open. And 3 of the existing board members decided to rerun. So there were two seats that were vacant, and there were 3 people, myself, Gage Bartholomew, and Steve Beggs, were all running for those remaining 2 seats. But of the 3 people who were on the board who were running for re-election, one of them was an independent, and so he couldn't run in the primaries. And so really there was 5 of us, 5 Republicans and 1 independent running for the 5 seats. And so, and what often happens with school district directors, we often cross register. And so, and actually anybody can do that, but it gets harder obviously. You only have to get 10 signatures on the ballot, the nomination ballot, for each party. So being a Republican, I could go and find 10 of the Republicans who said, yeah, I would agree to vote for you if you ran. And then I had to find a Democrat who would be willing to sponsor me, and then they would go get 10 Democrats to say that they would vote for me. And so even though I'm not a Democrat.
Yeah, but I feel like there's people that whenever they were my age, they registered as Democrat, and then as they get older, they're like, well, maybe I don't agree with everything, and then they just never re-register.
Sure.
And same with Republicans,
That's true. I mean, there are people, not everyone agrees with, if they register for a particular party, they don't necessarily entirely agree with their party's positions on everything. And that's fine. And but when you cross-register, so then because you're only, all 5 of us cross-registered. So there were 5 openings, 5 people on, so we all got on the November ballot. And then the 6th person the independent got on the ballot as an independent. And then they draw lots to determine what order you appear on the ticket. And I think he got on like the bottom one. and most people, if they vote for 5 out of the 6, they pick the
go
first
top,
5 or
yeah.
whatever. So they don't, unless they know the person. So he
Yeah.
ended up getting the fewest votes because he was an independent in this particular election. So.
So he automatically got placed at the bottom of that.
Well, he didn't
those
automatically
5.
get placed. I don't know how they. I think he got included in when they drew the lots, but he just by luck of the draw ended up being on the bottom. I think. But anyway, he
And that
he
was
got the
Gage?
fewest votes. No, Gage Bartholomew actually got elected.
Oh, okay.
It was one of the previous board members didn't get reelected. So, but so I didn't necessarily, because I knew there wasn't a lot of people running. I mean, I kind of did the whole word of mouth. I did a little bit on Facebook and let my friends know and that sort of thing. I didn't do a lot of campaigning per se. You're asking, but and it really, some years there are quite a few names that are running, and you would probably have to do a little more. But and if that happens the next time, if I decide to rerun in 4 years or 3 years now, I might have to campaign a little bit. But local elections like that, it really is, as I said, everybody kind of knows everybody. So
yeah.
It's a little easier than if I was running for, state Congress or state representative or something.
Yeah, and I think probably like 90% of the congregation here lives in the Lakeview School District.
Yeah, quite a few, yeah. I don't know if it's quite that high, but yeah, we have some people who live in Commodore Perry, for example, and some in Greenville, and so a little spread out. But yeah, there was quite a few people who knew that I was running from this congregation, and they could also tell their friends who maybe didn't go to our church, etc. So, but
that definitely probably boosted your
hopefully
your campaign, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So, and then now holding that position, what are some things you do to kind of like report back to the community what's going on? I mean, I know the board meetings are open to the public and stuff, but not everyone can make it, or not everyone's. So what are some ways that, like, coming back from there and be like, hey, this is what's going on in case you missed it?
Yeah, so I am in a couple of Facebook groups that I try and keep some people up to date, and there are people I know who have concerns about what's going on in the schools, because we have a resource center here at Emmanuel. Some of those families are, some of the reason they're here at the resource center is because of some of the things they didn't like happening at Lakeview, for example. And so I try and keep those families, informed as to what's going on at the school, just so they know. And Dawn, for example, and some of the people in our congregation who are involved in the resource center, I kind of let them know when the school board meetings are happening and, what the results were, etc. And I request input from them from time to time. I say, hey, we're talking about this. Do you have any comment about that? Do you have any concerns or questions or that you would like me to ask the board? And some people have given me, hey, ask about this, or, check about that. And so I do that. I bring those issues up to the board. And the issue with the board, I guess, or the tough part for me anyway, is that I am just one vote, and so if there's 5 other people who disagree with me or don't see don't have the same point of view, there's nothing I can do about that, right? So it's not, as long as there's a majority on a particular issue, then that's how it'll be voted, or that's how it'll get passed. But I have been able to at least share my opinion and express questions, or make sure that they've at least thought about some things that maybe in the past they didn't. So being in like proximity to those people, I feel like before they might not have had, I don't want to say a voice of reason, but maybe somebody that is founded, based on the biblical truths and stuff, and they were kind of maybe like one hand on that philosophy and then one hand on secular philosophy, and like it's just being in proximity to those people, being on that biblical foundation can kind of keep them grounded, sort of. I mean, it might be a slow process, but at least they're not tuning it out completely. Right, exactly. And so Steve and I obviously are now able to, bring a viewpoint anyway, or worldview that maybe they haven't encountered before or hadn't thought about. And so I mean, and for the most part, most of the things that we do as a school board, is approving field trips and, teacher funding for, special projects, that kind of thing. Most of it's, pretty mundane, really, to be honest. We do get into some issues though that have one of them obviously is raising taxes and that kind of thing, and whether or not how to fund the budget. That's always a big issue that everyone's always interested in, and those sorts of things. And there's always give and take. And again, Steve and I are 2 out of 9, so even if we both disagree with whatever, it'll still get passed. But at least we make our share a viewpoint anyway. That hopefully that. They have to consider anyway.
And like what I was saying, like you may not win that battle, but at least you're putting that thought in their head, and then hopefully over time, maybe that'll kind of start to sink in or wear off on them. So that's important that you're in there at least having an influence, I think.
Yeah. So one of the school board, the way it's currently organized, is there are specific committees for different things. There's a budget committee, there's a curriculum committee, which I'm on, and there's also they created a new committee, a policy committee, and they made me chair of that. So I chair the policy committee, and really the policy is the one thing that the board's truly the board's responsibility, is setting policy. I think a lot of people have misconceptions about how a school board works or what all our authority is. We're not supreme rulers either, right? So there is balance of power even on a school board. So
you had me sweating a little bit when you're talking about raising taxes. Like what?
Well, it's true. I mean, it's one of the things that's probably the budget and curriculum and school policy are those are the 3 big things that school boards get involved in, right? So But as far as how the school is administrated, we really don't have a lot of say. We don't really have a lot of, the only thing we can do is hire or fire the superintendent, who then implements the policy. So, we may have a policy, and I'll make something about, the school year. The school year has to have 180 days.
Okay.
And maybe the principal says, you know what? I'm going to make those 180 days from the beginning of August until the end of April. And shift the school year or whatever. Well, we don't necessarily have a lot of say whether he does that or not. If we decide we don't like it, we can maybe seek a different administrator. And honestly, he would probably still get an opinion from the board or whatever. But the school superintendent really has a lot of authority. I mean, he can do a lot of things that we don't really have any say over.
So the superintendent's kind of like the executive branch of the
Exactly,
school.
that's exactly right. So if there's a particular teacher that people are grumpy with for whatever reason, he grades really hard and everybody gets a C in their class, we can't go tell the superintendent, you got to fire that teacher, or you got to tell that teacher to be nicer in his class, whatever. That's up to the administrator. We don't really have any authority. We can't tell them to hire or fire a particular teacher just because we don't like them, for example. That's all administration. So, we can set guidelines. We can establish a grading system and in general, and as long as that teacher's following the grading system, well, that's kind of up to the teacher and the administration. So, if a parent has a problem with a teacher who feels like they're grading their particular child too hard, or, unfairly, well, the really going to the school board is not the appropriate thing to do. It's really going to the principal first, and if they don't like what the principal has to say, then they go to the superintendent, and if the superintendent treats them unfairly or not respectfully, well, then they can come to the school board and we can go tell the superintendent to do a better job. But ultimately, it's really the administration who handles those sorts of things, not the school board.
Yeah. And parents having problems with the teachers is kind of a new thing, huh?
Well,
back then it seemed like if there was a problem, you always looked at the kid and all right, what'd you do now?
Yeah.
But I don't know. That's how the times are changing, unfortunately, I guess. But so, were there any challenges or fears or self-doubt that you had to overcome to run for that position, or you just no, this is something I need to be involved in? Just dive in head first?
Well, I did pray about it and talk to my family about it because it's a big time commitment. I mean, it's as well as I talked to the other elders and Tim and the because it does have an impact on time is limited. Everybody has the same amount, so they all thought it was a good idea. We have had issues at the school. One of the things I had concerns about with the school was just the flow of communication and as we talked about before, it seemed like it was really tough to get answers from the school board or from the administration as to why they did make some decisions and so I was hoping to change some of that, and actually we're working on that. There are some things we're trying to do better in that regard. So, I felt like I could go and the school board was missing, maybe a Christian worldview, and so, and as it turns out, Steve Beggs had a similar idea, and so that made it a little easier actually having somebody.
Yeah, that's nice having kind of a
right?
running mate, sort of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that kind of sealed the deal for me anyway. That maybe it was the right time, and plus, for whatever reason, there weren't many people currently interested. So,
which is a shame.
Yeah, exactly. And so it seemed like it was the right time.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that people nowadays think that any public position that you can hold, and they're like, oh, that's too much for me to handle, when really that's what our whole nation was founded upon, was just average people stepping up to what needed to be done.
That's true. I mean, and especially at the how we train up a child in the way they should go, right? The whole training a child and the education that we provide them. Ultimately, it's the parent's responsibility to educate their child, right? So, what we're doing at the Lakeview School Board is the state has mandated that we will provide a public education, but that may or may not be the best education for every family, and so every family needs to decide whether they're going to homeschool or send their child to a Christian school or a private school or a cyber school, or we have lots of options, fortunately, in this country, but every family needs to kind of make that decision. But if they decide they can't afford a private school or don't have the time to homeschool or whatever, well, then I want to make sure that if they're going to the public school, that it's an appropriate public school. It's the best public school that, that's available in our county anyway, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I saw a tweet from somebody this week saying that they wanted to impose some sort of legislation to limit your choices for homeschool or something like that.
Right.
It's like, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I was listening to a podcast today about North Korea and how they bring them up with all the propaganda and stuff, and then they teach the children about the Korean War, and they put like a false spin on it, and that's all they know because that's how they were brought up. So I mean, it might not seem like a big deal right now, but fast forward 50, 100 years from now, and like the day-to-day as we know it could be completely turned around.
Sure, yeah.
So, but yeah, I think that's important that we get involved at the local level, and then, some of us may even see the need to go on to state or federal.
Yeah.
So.
Well, exactly right. And so, even some things that we want to do locally, there's still, the Pennsylvania Department of Education has requirements and, standardized testing, all those things that they place requirements on us that we then have to follow. And so, what kind of math we get to teach and that kind of stuff. So, even if we wanted to do something different here locally, and, some of that stuff is required at the state level. So then we got to start calling our state representatives and saying, hey, this needs to be changed, or, this is wrong or whatever. So even, curriculum choices and that kind of thing. So.
But we have a federal minimum, don't we? Isn't there a federal minimum education that would, the GED sort of, but at the state level, isn't there minimum.
Yeah, so then the federal government also puts guidelines in from time to time that the Federal Department of Education.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Thought he had a question. Anyway, so the Federal Department of Education also puts requirements on school districts, like for example, cafeteria food and that kind of stuff. In the past they've made requirements, and then the states have to follow them and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it goes all the way up. One of the things that I brought up to the board that we're actually going to do this fall, if a school district does take federal funds, which ours does, that they have to support Constitution Day in September.
Yeah.
And so Lakeview had done a little bit of that, and when the law first was passed back in, I think it was 2006 or 7, school districts did a little more of it, but they've kind of forgotten about it now.
Yeah.
So I'm bringing it back. So this year I made sure, since I'm on the curriculum committee, that all the teachers are going to be reminded, and every class is going to do something on the Constitution that day at least.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, when I was in school, I mean, obviously Constitution Day comes around each year, but the only one I really remember when I was in 8th grade, and that was 7 years ago, and we read the preamble. We didn't even read the whole thing.
Okay.
So, but there's a lot of the premise for the entire Constitution is based on that first paragraph.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that really kind of sets up like the tone for what the Constitution gets into. But all right, well, I appreciate what you do for our church and the community, and I enjoyed our conversation, and I'm glad about the digital progress that we're able to provide for the congregation in the near future. I know during this time we've been working on some things and like doing these interviews and stuff, and so yeah, it's been nice working with you and the rest of the elders and the worship team, getting content out to the congregation. And so for those watching on Facebook or YouTube, feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.